to
Yes,
tell you
I
when.
think we're live.
Yep, we
Live
are.
and direct. So, we're back for number 2 of 11 named people. As Sean will tell you, um, the concept of this show is based on something that the great Marxist historian Eric Hobsbawm said about the nation, and borrowing the Benedict Anderson idea of the nation as an imagined community. He says, nowhere is that imagined community more real than in the form of 11 named people on a football field. So that's where we get the concept, the name. And of course, we're talking tonight in particular, well, we're talking about many things. But one of the things we're talking about is Barcelona, Simon Cooper's book, that would be about Johan
I think that will
Cruyff.
take up that's going to take up the bulk of our thing because we went and read
Exactly.
it.
And all I want to
It's
say about that, staying in the Hobsbawm tradition of Marxist historiography, is
this is a
Marx
heavy
himself.
start, bro. This is a heavy start, but it's all
Heavy
good.
start. But okay, Marx himself once said that people make history, but not under circumstances of their own choosing, because the traditions of dead generations weigh like a nightmare on the shoulders of the living. So, is Johan Cruyff the nightmare on Pep's shoulders? What are the circumstances in which future coaches are going to make history? That's what we're going to get into tonight. But I think you wanted to say something about the Women's World Cup.
I like how when we open tonight, you're also giving away a little bit. I mean, this is like a slight age difference between us, but we both, I think, very much formed by kind of the 1980s in South Africa. Like I was in high school, and by the end of it, I was going to university. And like I always tell people, I grew up like very very working class, and my father, he barely cared for politics. Neither did my mother. They had become like Christians, like evangelical Christians. But I was like in school, I would say, and then by the time I went to university, I'm heavily influenced by this kind of like historical materialist way of thinking and understanding the world. It's like as this program is going to grow, and as we keep talking every week, we'll drop some
knowledge.
We'll weave in our past into this thing of uniquely being in South Africa.
Because it weighs like a nightmare on our shoulders.
Well, because we had hopes. We had hopes for like another world, like in the place we were, but in general for the world. I think that was part of our kind of our makeup. So we're disappointed, I think, sometimes. But I think we carry, like you said, we're still carrying this like this historical materialist bag with us. Everybody else is like got other new buzzwords and other fashionable approaches, but I think we are strangely sticking to these.
Children of the dialectic.
to the dialectic. In any case, so as Tony said, for people who are watching now, or if you're going to watch later, what we're going to do is we want to talk mostly. We both went and read what is probably one of the most interesting sports books in the last while, Simon Cooper's. I don't want to mess up there's like different titles apparently. The original title I think was called the Barcelona Complex, or is that the English? That's the one for the English for Britain. And then there's another title, something like Barcelona, Messi, and something else. That's
it's like every time he writes a book about football, they translate the title for an American audience. Like it is a different title here.
What's the one that he wrote with that football economist?
Soccernomics. It's called here.
Soccernomics, yeah. And then probably the better book that he wrote is was it called Football Against the Enemy?
That was its British title.
Yeah, that was his first. What was it called in the US? Soccer. Soccer Against the Enemy. But I think that's probably he was young and he had gone to he'd gone on this trip around the world, and there's like a great chapter in there.
Simon is amazing. He's a legend. I mean, like he's
that South African family, right?
Yeah, his dad is South African. But
I think like anthropologist or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and they moved to Holland.
Before we get too deep into that, let's just I want to give a quick shout out for today was the completion of yesterday and today were the completion of the semifinals for the African Women's Cup of Nations. or I don't know if you say Women African Cup of Nations. And what happens is like the semi-finalists of that tournament, that's the qualification for the Women's World Cup, which is next year, I think, in Australia and New Zealand. And there were like some favorites, like teams that we generally think about when we think of women's football in Africa. They had a shot at the 4 spots, and then other newcomers. And congratulations if you want to Zambia, which qualified for the first time. And I think Zambia beat Botswana, which I also thought was interesting, which is like, Senegal. Zambia beat Senegal. And I think Morocco also qualified for the first time, which is brilliant. And then the other 2 teams that qualified are South Africa. And I was on a walk, and I followed that result on my phone, like just kind of the sort of, the update of the time. And South Africa scored a goal in the 14th minute over Tunisia. And they eventually won the game 1-0 with some couple of minutes for injury time. And then the other clash was Nigeria. The final spot was Nigeria versus Cameroon. So if you know a little bit about the Women's World Cup, South Africa has qualified once before in 2019. That was their first time. They've qualified also for the Olympics. Nigeria has qualified for every Women's World Cup since it started. They've actually they got the best African women's footballers. So nobody was surprised that they were in contention. But Cameroon, I think, had gone to the last 2 Women's World Cups. They got embarrassed. I don't know if you remember, against France in the last one in France. It was bad. It was bad. If you Google Cameroon in the Women's World Cup, it wasn't nice to watch.
We're always going to have that problem at a Women's World Cup where France actually is potentially a proxy team for Africa as well, because there's so many players.
France probably got a bunch of Cameroonian, people of Cameroonian descent in that squad.
Cameroon, Mali,
like playing for them, yeah. So Cameroon didn't make it.
So you see that right now.
Something. Yeah, just before you talk, because I know you want to say something about France, and because there's another tournament going on at the moment. But the other thing just about the African qualifiers is I think there's one more place I need to check on that. And I think
Morocco.
Cameroon still has a chance to make. I think there's like 5 places, and I'm not. You may check on that, but I think Cameroon has one more chance to make it still to the World Cup. But we could check on that and bring that back when we come to the next program. Yeah.
I suppose what you were talking about, what I hinted at to you before, was watching a little bit, because it happens during office hours, so it's hard to actually watch. But the current Women's Euro tournament, I just was watching a little bit the other day, and apropos what we're talking about tonight, I watched Spain first, in their first game, and I was like, wow, this team is playing like a Pep Guardiola team, like Pep's Barca at its best, like a lot of short passing and movement, and just completely keeping possession. And then a couple of days later, of course, they fall to Germany, and Germany is playing what?
Well, both of them had lost one game, right?
Yeah, but Germany is playing like what became the antidote to Pep football from the German tradition, a Klopp of gegenpressing, like just really aggressive pressing high up on the pitch, winning the ball back when they lose it from Spain, and punishing Spanish mistakes. It really was like classic Liverpool type of football, where you see, their first goal comes because they pressure the goalkeeper into making a mistake. And, it was like when Sadio Mane did that to City's goalkeeper, like it was different version, but not too dissimilar. But it's just like, okay, this thing, the great Uruguayan football writer, Eduardo Galeano, anti-imperialist writer, but football, of course, being the passion. He once said, show me how you play and I'll tell you who you are, right? But the idea that there's a national idiom for the way football is played. And I'm like, these days it's like, show me how you play and I'll tell you like which like European coaching tradition you fall.
What's the word? Antecedent? I don't know. Antecedent? I don't know how to say that. But the one other thing that we did notice, and then we'll get into the Cooper book, is there's historically in women's football, it used to be like the Scandinavians were really strong. I think they used to have like really good. They had often the better organized club leagues. And Germany was strong too, but it's been interesting to watch in this UEFA, the women's UEFA, how England and France are now dominating this tournament, and that's also partly because they have the most well-run, most lucrative. Spain has, a decent women's league also, but it replicates the men's, which sort of Barcelona, like the Barcelona, how do you say it, feminine, being the outsider, like playing really well. One of the Nigerians actually plays for them. But watching like how the women's game is going to start replicating what happens in the men's game. It's like where the money is going to be like where the good national teams are going to come from. So it's like France and England. I'm not predicting anything because people are going to say, well, you said England
Excuse me. Wait. You're making a terrible mistake there. Because what you're missing is that England is where the money is in club football, but they're still a terrible national team.
I mean, they played well. The women's team, they're winning like crazy.
No, I'm saying the men. You're saying it's going to replicate the men, but in men's football, England is poor. England is a second-tier national team, despite being one of the strongest leagues.
We'll get into this another night, because I'm burning to get this Cooper book, But yes. I think the part of the story here is like the women's game doesn't entirely follow the labor migrations and the who can play. I think the women's game in many of these countries still, to some extent, there's some class issues. Some probably I don't know if you could call it pay for play. So it's like who plays for the national teams in women's football is still very different from men's football. Women's football is very much controlled by countries that are wealthier. So, it's like it's going to line up like, and women's football isn't like the national leagues aren't as diverse as, say, it's still unusual. When I think, was it Chelsea or Arsenal, they signed Sam Kerr, who's like the best Australian footballer. It was a big deal that an Australian footballer was going to go, one of the best players in the world was going to go play in England, that there was money to go play football in England. So it's not exactly where the men's game is. And I think it still lines up a little bit with like, if the national league is good, the national team, if the national league is good, if the money is in the national league. So Olympic, I think it's Olympique Lyonnais or Lyon. That's the best football team in women's football in Europe.
But also, I mean, the other obvious class dimension of it is that the industrialized countries will have women's youth football far more with much higher level of investment, much higher level of facilities, elite youth sports programs.
You see that at the World Cup. Yeah. You openly see that at the World Cup. Yeah, it's like watching African teams at the World Cup in like the 80s or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like
the differences is just, it's like you could see the inequalities in women's football. It's so obvious.
Yeah.
In any case, before we lose the very few people that are watching, why don't you set us up with Simon Cooper?
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of really fascinating insights in Simon's book to help us think about the game and think about how the game has evolved, the club game, the international game, etc. And
you want to just set up, like, I think it would help for people who never read the book. Like, what is the book? Yeah.
So the book is basically the rise and fall of Barcelona as we know it. So this is, the pinnacle of Barcelona as we know it today is the Pep Guardiola team. I actually rewatched the highlights of that 2011 Champions League final, where they basically play rondo around Manchester United for like most of the game. Like it's just United's just not touching the ball. You watch Park Ji-sung in that game, and it's like this poor guy is just running himself.
That was at Wembley, right?
Wembley, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think I watched that live.
It was just like this team that could play. This team of little guys, okay, very important people my height, okay. These guys are like 5'6", 5'7". They're short. They're not physically imposing. Like if you look at the three critical players in that team, Lionel Messi, obviously, Xavi, and Andres Iniesta, they're tiny. Like in a more physically oriented youth system like the United States currently has in its system, they wouldn't be considered strong enough to actually be credible kind of youth footballers. But so Simon sets out to explain how Barcelona gets to that point where literally they're playing on another planet to most of the people they're playing against. So he looks at the evolution of that team, starting with Johan Cruyff. Okay, Johan Cruyff as
the backstory is like, how do you get to this team? In order to understand how you got to the best team of the Pep era, you need to know this other story. Yeah, it sounds weird.
And it starts with Dutch football in the 1970s. The coach being Rinus Michels, and the player who orchestrates everything on the field being Johan Cruyff, the Ajax midfielder who's a very temperamental character. And Simon paints a really interesting picture of Cruyff, because what you get with the sense of Cruyff is that he talks with the ball. He's not somebody he can't actually sometimes find the words for the ideas that he has about the game and how it's played. He's quite fascinating, contrarian, etc. He leaves Ajax, which at that point is the best team in the world, hard to imagine now. And he falls out with the management and so on, moves to Barcelona, which at that point is like a provincial. They're like fifth in La Liga at that point. They're a minor. Sean seems to have dropped off.
No, I'm here. I'm messing up. I'm trying to entertain our viewers by showing them that we have more than one camera, Tony.
Okay, no, that's good. Go for it. So basically, Cruyff moves to Barcelona. This is the height of Franco Spain, and he brings with him, Rinus Michels is there already, and they bring this model of Dutch football, which was called Total football in the 1970s. So if you go back to the tapes of like the 1974 World Cup, the Dutch are the best team on show. Like the Dutch are just playing this absolutely sublime football. Of course, they lose the final, but it's almost like they were too embarrassed to win because they were playing. They were so much better than everybody else. But this model.
But you're right. There is part of it. Part of it is kind of like I think in a way he's sort of. Well, the part of the story is like Ajax is like really good, and he's playing for Ajax, I think, from '68 till roughly.
And he's the center. He's the model of that midfield.
Yeah, they're winning European championships. I think they even won like the equivalent of now the World Club Cup, and they also in a place which is the Dutch aren't really into like stars really yet.
Yeah,
it's very egalitarian.
Is that Cruyff actually, they're a team. The team is completely interchangeable. They're playing a system. And they model things like you've never seen before. Like fullbacks, the
interchangeable,
exchanging positions. You have sort of, Ruud Krol is a centre back, but suddenly he's on the left wing. And everybody can play every position. Goalkeepers are expected to be sweepers. So a lot of things we take for granted now, like the goalkeeper can use his feet, but that wasn't a norm.
And then you have like Cruyff is like mad Cruyff. I'm gonna say Cruyff.
Yeah.
He gets mad because he's not the captain anymore. He's in the team. Like I think he got mad because he wasn't, and I also think he wasn't being paid well. So
nobody was back then.
Nobody was being paid well, and so then he asked his agent, which I think is his father-in-law, to like take this like Barcelona has been I think they've been looking for him. They want him as a player. Because Michels is there, right? So he goes to Barcelona, which is also weird. He goes from a place which is at that point part of that 68 counterculture, modern Europe, and he goes to like Spain, which is this like, dictatorship where football is essentially like there's a Spanish word like fury.
Furia, yeah.
Like it's violent. It's almost kind of violent. It's not like it's not like this kind of beautiful football that he's coming from. It's just all force. Like you have to play with force. Like there's very little tactics involved. And I think even Rinus Michels was like he was like, this football, he was very dismissive of the kind of football that they were playing when Cruyff, when he arrived in Spain. But it wasn't like he played okay, but I don't think they won. They didn't win anything in Europe.
No, his real impact at Barca is as a coach when he comes back after '88. And I mean, I think the thing is that Cruyff football is a football of ideas. It's a football of
that's a key point.
It's a mental game. It's basically players can be the most unbelievable athletes or not particularly athletic at all, but they have to have the technical skills to basically communicate with the ball. So the ball is literally, the pass is the language in which the team talks to one another. He literally, as a player on the field, sets up the team by the way he's passing the ball. He's telling people where to be.
Did he invent the rondo, if I remember, or somebody else did training? He refined it, yeah.
Well, he refined it. It was some obscure guy who introduced it as a training. But if you watch, like the rondo is a training exercise where the players are in a circle or in a very small group, and it's piggy in the middle, basically. Somebody has to, they're passing the ball around a player in a very small space, or two players or whatever it is, that has to win the ball. And that's like the very basic.
And he introduces other things like, sorry for interrupting you. You were saying?
No, I'm saying it's a basic training method, but it's also the way they play triangles. It's like you watch a Pep team; they're just passing in small triangles to move the ball. Everybody's always
saying like football is about 5 against 3 or whatever. Like it's like you have to like figure out like how to defend if you're 3 to defend against 5. Yeah. If you are 2 to defend against 4. Like he basically, it was just like what it now sounds like, oh, okay, that's what you do. But when he was bringing it into football as a coach, it was very unusual. Yeah.
And even on the training field, like, I remember once reading that Edwin van der Sar, who was the Man United goalkeeper, plays as a striker in amateur football. But that is Ajax Cruyffian football. Like he wants his strikers to play centre back in training because he wants them to understand what a central defender is doing and thinking and the way they're using their bodies, and like it's a much more mental game. It's much more.
So I don't want us to get too caught up in like we could sit here for hours talking about the setup of the book, but I want to get to one of the things I know you wanted to talk about. So just quickly, the back history is like, in order to understand Barcelona, you have to understand like Johan Cruyff's impact on it. But as you rightly said, you really need to understand the part of him as a coach. What he was as a player is to how he grew up, how he got to this, how he played, then makes you later understand this cantankerous, weird guy who can only communicate with football, who's a bad business person, who is kind of annoying. And also, Simon Cooper, as a journalist, Simon Cooper, as a football fan, he admires him. But then as a journalist, he falls out with him because he's so weird. And so just to like finish that, because I want to get to some of the topics, because I know you have a list of topics that I want us to, because I want to talk about them. But so one of the things is like Barcelona is really the key figures are Johan Cruyff as a coach, and Lionel Messi as a player. So that's the second part. Lionel Messi
and Pep, because Pep is Pep, Pep is, so remember, Pep is a player in Cruyff.
Pep is a sort of silent partner in this. Pep is a how do you call it, co-star?
Well, I'm not sure that Pep isn't actually inherited. That takes it to the next level, because Pep is basically a player in Cruyff's great Barcelona.
Yeah. Pep is really,
he learns everything he knows from Cruyff.
Actually, just before we go on, like when you read it, you think when you're anticipating the story, you think that Messi is going to be Cruyff Mark II. Like Messi is the fulfillment of the Cruyffian thing. It's actually Pep Guardiola.
Yeah, very much.
Messi is really the anti-Cruyff. Messi, it turns out, is going to destroy the club.
Yeah,
That's part of the thesis
yes, I like that.
of the book.
That's
Yeah.
yes.
I said when I read it, when I started reading it, I was like, "Yo, this is Messi. Messi is the fulfillment of Cruyff." And then it's like, "Nah, hell no. Messi is the complete opposite of what
It's complete
what Cruyff was about. Like
Yes.
Messi understood like what about the field. He
Well,
was made to
actually, he
understand
tracks.
how to play like a Barcelona way, but
Yeah,
as a figure and as an individual, he had a completely different set of like values. Like he
and
was more
what you see
controlling.
happening is that like Messi comes like the key institution at Barcelona is La Masia, which is their academy, their youth academy, which is the most accomplished academy everywhere in the world. And the great secret,
everybody was trying to copy it, and
and the great secret of the Pep Golden team, the one that is the best team of the 21st century, I think, that we've seen, with the Messi, Iniesta, Xavi, etc., is that team had about 7 players that came through the Barca academy. They weren't bought. They didn't buy Messi for any significant sum. They signed him when he was 13 years old and was tiny, needed hormone treatment, etc. So this whole generation came up together, not earning huge amounts of money, in a culture that was teaching them a way of playing the game. That's the same if you're a 6-year-old in Barca's academy, or if you're on the field on a Sunday at the Camp Nou. It's like this DNA of a particular kind of football that's based on the rondo, that's based on space, compressing the space when the opposition has the team, expanding it when you have the ball, knowing that you always need to have the ball, because if you have it, they can't hurt you. The 5-second rule, you drop your feet on the floor 5 seconds. In Barca, Pep, and even Cruyff tradition, you lose the ball for the first 5 seconds. You all hunt. You all try 5 seconds of pressing to try win it back. So those ideas are drummed into them from when they're like lighties, as we say in Cape Town. When they're very very young. And what happens, as you say, Messi sort of ruining the club in the end, is that like when Pep leaves, you also see like the waning of the Masia and of the academy. And there's this sort of like Messi starts to evolve from being, the best individually skilled player in a team system to being like more like a Cristiano Ronaldo in a way, more like this individual, pass him the ball and he'll make something happen. Like the system starts to lose its way. He becomes more of a galactical, more of he becomes bigger than the team, which really told.
Well, he also starts to ask for way more. Like his wage demands are nuts. Like I think it like for like a 4-year period, he made like almost like $500 million from the club, like more than $500 million. It's like, I think that's the other part of the story. But so I want to ask you this question on this, because I know people love to talk about Lionel Messi, and he's like the best player in the world and whatever, and he's seen like, if you don't know Barcelona, if you don't know like Cooper's book, or if you don't follow, like watch documentaries about Barcelona, you like the way we understand that golden era of Barcelona under Pep Guardiola is that Messi is the architect of it. He deserves all the praise. He's the best footballer in the world. The club is happy. The fans are happy. Whatever. The thing that I wasn't like shocked by this, because I've always had, I've always said about Messi, he doesn't pay taxes. You remember when he had to go to spend some time in court? He takes these like fees to go visit all kinds of authoritarian regimes, and like lands, get the 2 million and leave. I think there's a famous like one anyway that goes to Equatorial Guinea, and hangs out with the what's his name, Teodoro Obiang, President Obiang. But anyway, I don't want to get too bogged down in that. The thing I was going to ask is like, how the way you think about Messi, if people read this book, I think they'll come away with a very different perspective on Messi.
Yeah,
not as this kind of like angel, mute-like figure who doesn't say much. I don't know. Can I say mute?
Yeah. I don't.
Okay.
I don't think I'm.
He doesn't say much, and that he doesn't communicate much. But it turns out that he's really powerful. That I think Cooper suggests that he ran in a way, sort of like he was the power behind the scene.
He was more powerful than the coaches.
He was more, and we'll get to the setup of like who runs the club.
But I just want to say, like for anyone who doesn't anybody who has that naive idea of like the GOAT, right? That Messi is this player that can, completely like that he is Barcelona versus, the simple question, the simple explanation, or the simple counter or negation of that idea is just look at him with Argentina. He's hardly ever won anything with Argentina. Messi with Argentina is not even a shadow of the player that Messi at Barcelona was, because of the team. That's because the team is what makes all the difference. Because his teammates in Argentina are pass the ball to Leo, he'll make something happen. There's no system. There's no.
But there's also like in the book, and there's other little things about him, like how he would, if he didn't like if he felt that he wasn't playing with the best players, regardless of whether they came from La Masia now, they were just like being bought from wherever, then he would tell coaches like, take that guy off. I don't want to. I think that he's not happy with. And by the end, when they just started buying, no disrespect to you, Martin Brathwaite, if you ever listen to this, you're probably a nice guy. I think you have some decent politics, but basically, by then Messi was just like, nah, I can't play with the.
But I can't, So basically, somebody in KY718 is saying correctly, Messi won Copa America. That's a pretty.
That's like nobody qualifies for that. Not to disrespect you, KY. Nobody qualifies for that.
And also, that's pretty slim pickings for an international career that's lasted, like decade plus for what's supposedly the greatest football player in the world.
I'm gonna drop this here, and then I want to move on to the class structure of Barcelona.
Sanchez. Yeah, Alexis Sanchez has won more Copa Americas than Leo Messi.
Look, he is the greatest player in the world, and I've said this on other programs, and I'll say it again. You take an unfancied club called Napoli, and you win the Champions League with them.
La mano de Dios.
You win the Champions League with them. You take that same unfancied club in an era when all the top clubs, I think in Britain, they weren't even allowing none. They weren't very keen on players who weren't from the rest of Europe or even Africa or whatever, or South America. And you take, there was only allowed, I think, 1 or 2 professionals per team, and all the other teams in Italy had really brilliant players. And you and that unfancied club, you win the Serie A. Now, you also take your national team, which the great Lionel Messi, KY's already said. Oh, let's look at KY. KY's not KY's.
No, we can't get into
KY saying that Maradona was playing against accountants and plumbers. I'm sorry, KY, but you take that team and you win the World Cup and you score probably the greatest goal, and then also the most consequential goal in the history of football. But
we're going back to GOAT theory here.
Okay, we said we were going to talk about GOAT theory, but we want to move. We sort of dealt with GOAT theory.
First, let's talk about
this punctures a lot, this sort of idea of Messi as GOAT, and we will return to this topic because the GOAT theory.
And it's one in which we disagree, by the way, so that's good. It's like
the GOAT theory, I think, derives from an American debate about greatest of all time, Muhammad Ali, blah blah blah. And in football, I think it used to be like the way I understood GOAT was the GOAT was good on the field, but also the GOAT was consequential, like off the field. Like, there was like they stood for something, they laid down their life for something. Pele was seen like that kind of figure, and I would recommend this documentary. Hold on, Pele initially was considered the GOAT in that era when TV was coming. He was considered the greatest footballer of all time.
Yeah, we didn't watch Pele on TV every week.
Exactly. So when we had our first chance to see a player who was like that,
but also his politics were terrible versus Socrates, who we all know is.
I'm Pele, and I'm not here to defend Pele.
I agree with KY718. Pele was missing.
It's a great documentary. Yes, I'm not getting distracted by the comments. There's a great documentary about Pele on Netflix. which is, I think it's worthwhile for trying to understand Pele's conundrum in the late 60s playing for Brazil during a dictatorship. To expect Pele to be the only martyr, like,
you might even make the case that Mohamed Salah is in a similar position with Egypt right now, where it's a dictatorship. His family lives there. They're very vulnerable. Whatever he believes, if it's not, and I suspect it isn't with what the regime believes, given everything we do know about him, he's not going to say a word. He's going to.
Got to be careful. You got to be careful. Yeah. So let's get back, because I want us to. I know we have a bunch of topics to get through on the book and on Barcelona. The other thing that I also found interesting, which I think a lot of people don't know much about Barcelona, I think you can break it down more also, is the ownership structure of Barcelona, and Barcelona as a kind of a class project. So before you speak on that, Tony, because I know you're warming up again. There is this, again, the outside idea again of Barcelona is this, like, more than a club, the kind of proxy for a nation that isn't really a nation, that doesn't have that's inside, like almost like a nation, an occupied nation, and the club and the team becomes its expression. And with that La Masia stuff, and now and then they had they always had a really good foreign player, Ronaldo, Rivaldo, Ronaldinho, Maradona briefly, but he wasn't doing too well there. And then finally, I think, which is Cooper's point, Messi is like the one that makes Barcelona, it's the one that makes Barcelona successful. So it's like this club that's a stand-in for the nation. That's how we think about it. But when you kind of know a little bit more about the club, then you learn it is very much a kind of middle-class project. I mean, if you want to break that down a little bit, and how and even what the role of foreigners within that structure, like as players and so on.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, I was, I'd always assumed, like probably many of us, that Barcelona represents Catalan rebellion against Franco's fascist dictatorship. And turns out it really, and as as we've learned over the years, it was really not that simple. Really not that simple.
They did a lot of revisionist history on their own story. Yeah.
Right, and their relationship of their owners at various times with the regime. That said, yes, it was a center of resistance, of cultural resistance, because Franco was banning the Catalan language and Catalan expression and so on. But what you get in Simon's book is a very clear sense of which social class is driving this project, and it's the merchant bourgeoisie of Barcelona. That is essentially who owns the club, not not some oligarch. It's a class. It's a class project.
Yeah, that's another thing. It's really different from how you think of football clubs. Even if we say now it's a very limited middle class project, but it's very different from how we think of a football club, say in England.
Yeah, very much.
Even before the oligarchs, that it's owned by like Ken Bates or
But also in the class basis of the support base. So what Simon captures, which is really interesting to me, is like if you go to a Barcelona home game during the league season, like people respectfully sing that Barcelona anthem at the beginning, and then there's silence. It's versus like an English crowd that is just chanting, singing, noisy. I
think you said it's like going to the opera.
Yeah, it's like, exactly. It's like polite bourgeois sort of.
And then you leave because you don't want to run into traffic. So it's like,
yeah, and it's also like they go for a very fancy lunch before. It's not a working class institution. I mean, and in fact, I always I think the best Barcelona souvenir I ever bought anyone was to my contrarian brother-in-law Stephen, who likes being honest, as we say in Cape Town. So when I was in Barcelona a few years ago on a family holiday, I'm like, the best gift I could think of for him, when the city that sells you like Barcelona shirts is like the signature. I've been to Barcelona. I got him an Espanyol shirt, which he left. Espanyol being the ranty little club that basically was, even by the name, and tell you, working class people from the rest of Spain that were working in Barcelona. Like, it's got that sort of contrarian spirit, but it's not the bourgeois nationalist.
And here's another, and to that point again, to this kind of like the 150,000, I think what they called Sochi these are these people who are the voters, in the club elections, and they vote for like this club president, who's usually a kind of, as we said, like a sort of stand-in Catalan, uh, uh, almost like a president without any power of like, like when you pick the president, the prime minister. But what I was going to say is like, so the other part is like Barcelona fights like so as football globalized and people open up memberships, like I can be a member of Liverpool, I can be a member of Man United or PSG, and I live in New York, wherever. Well, people do it because that's how you get.
I'm saying, why would you be a member of Man United?
Oh, sorry. No, I'm speaking for like the viewer who's going to catch the program. Yeah. So the other thing about it is like Barcelona. I forgot the name of the one president. I think it was Laporta. Who fought this idea of extending the membership to people beyond this kind of closed shop. I think he made some remark like, what if there's lots of Chinese people joining, then the president's going to be in Beijing. I mean, it sounds offensive, but part of this is this idea of this, in this age of globalization of football, people identifying from all over the world with this club, thinking, oh, I could but the club is holding on to like a very specific, in its glory, up until the end, I suppose, of its glory. Is I don't know what they're going to do now because they're running out of money, and maybe memberships are going to help. But for years, they kind of resisted these things that other clubs were thinking of themselves, as becoming global. Partly because that thing controlled the way the club was run was with these members, and they control the club. Yeah.
But what's so interesting, and it's almost like you don't want to overdo the class reductionist, crude, vulgar marketing. Right.
Well, we're gonna do it anyway. We're gonna do it anyway.
But it definitely, there's some sense of like, the merchant bourgeoisie of Barcelona sort of reaching its kind of historical, limit or kind of, like basically it's unable to rule, as it were. Like you basically have these elections every year in which rival, merchant bourgeois have to kind of compete against one another with promises that are sort of ridiculous. So it's like, I'll pay $500 million to keep Messi at the club, or I'll sign David Beckham. Oh, it turns out he's going real. Just like ridiculous ideas. Yeah. But if you look what happened to Barcelona, like after Pep's gone and after La Masia is not producing, the next generation of quality players at quite the same level. Quality players are leaving, like Thiago, who came to Liverpool. He moves on because he's not going to wait. Well,
that's also, it's not to do so much with quality players. Like he has this other little argument that like, if you have La Masia and it's really successful, and it happens that like you have Xavi, Iniesta, you like their understudy.
Yeah, you're not going to ever get a game.
You're not going to get in, so then you have to leave. Then the model is great, but it doesn't. If the team stabilizes, then the guy who's like the understudy has to go.
Yeah, and you look at Pedro, a lot of players in that next, the ones in waiting all have to leave.
And then the guy who leaves is always intent on making revenge. Alcantara comes back, beats them 8-2. Eto, who's not a Masia product, but he comes back and beats them too. Yeah.
But you also see like that ownership class, like the colossal mess they make because of these panicky needs to sort of get elected. So like the classic thing is, what do they do with the money when Neymar leaves? Like they buy Philippe Coutinho. Like
because they were sitting on all this money and people expected them, the Sochi, I keep saying it wrong. They're expecting something. And so they got to go by pace. The best case of this is like when they buy Frankie de Jong from Ajax, and the guy goes and he offers Ajax like twice the amount of money. I think Ajax didn't even ask for it, and they get offered all this money for this player. And then the board member who, the elected whatever person who goes and gets the signature done, he cries of relief, like he's sobbing, because he got the signing, because that's what the members want. Like he's got to show the members, something. And so
it's a pale imitation of Galactico Real Madrid in a way. And like the irony is now Frankie de Jong doesn't want to leave Barca because they owe him so much money in back wages, and they're desperately trying to get him to go to United, to reunite him with Ten Hag from Ajax. and he doesn't want to go because United's not in the Champions League, but also like he's earning so much at Barca, but they can't really pay him. Like the 2008 financial crisis, COVID, whatever, just has kind of wiped it out. It's kind of that, and Messi having drained so much of the resources, and then they couldn't even actually keep him.
I want to make some other quick points quickly before because I know time's going to run against us. I don't know if this is a disagreement with the thesis of the book, but it's not entirely true that at like the Cruyff era or the Pep era, that is entirely the La Masia. Maybe the La Masia gets a bigger role like in the success with the Pep era, but it's also true that Barcelona always bought. So like this idea of like it's a culture, it's this, because there's a way in which I think there's somebody who's probably going to read Cooper's book and be like, oh, he's over romanticizing this, because he kind of says, I love the club, they loved me, and so on.
I think.
But let me just make the quick. I want to make the quick thing. What I was going to say is like, at various moments, it's like Stoichkov. Is it Stoichkov, the guy?
Yeah.
He's like a commentator now on Mexican TV. Ronaldinho, Rivaldo, the German Bernd Suster, whatever. Like it's
but
not
even in the Pep era, it's like
David, even in the Pep era, there's like Dani Alves. It's like to kind of. It's not entirely true that maybe the team.
But Simon isn't saying that 11 players come from the Masia.
No, he's not saying that. I'm just saying like
the core comes from the Masia and the playing style comes from the Masia, and you integrate players around that who.
You always have foreigners playing for the club. Yeah, I'm not.
That's
what I said. I'm not disagreeing with it. I think if you misread it, sometimes you might think he's saying that all the 11 are coming from there. That's not his argument. They're coming from these. From these different kind of places, yeah.
But now I have a question for you. We've talked about class because of our dialect
own obsessions.
What about race? Because we are South African.
So I was. It's funny when you say what about race. I remember when I first got the book and started reading it, and I have sort of a project that I'm trying to work on over time, which is to look at kind of race in international football, and more like my migrancy and blah blah blah. I'll describe it better when we have the time. But the thing that struck me about it is like, so in the class structure of Barcelona, like the members, the different tiers, like the staff I think contains of like the people who work in the offices, the physiotherapists, the drivers, then also the players. There's this category. What is the category where he has a word for like the former players who stick around, like who make it their home? And
I don't know, talk about the environment a lot.
Yeah, there's all these. So there's like among the so there's the people who own the club. There's the members. Then there's like the staff, and the staff are like players, coaches, blah blah blah. So one of the things is, I think, and I'm trying to remember the exact quote, but it's something like, there wasn't much racism at Barcelona, is I think the phrase he used. Maybe I don't want to misquote him, but it's near the beginning of the book. Like it wasn't that the players who played there, didn't say much about racism, and partly that's because you had like players had been black players or players, players of African descent had been elevated to positions of authority within the club. Like Eric Hobsbawm becomes like the sporting director. And you have like some of the players, like Ronaldinho is. We could debate and discuss Ronaldinho's political or cultural identity, but Ronaldinho is basically Messi's mentor. Interesting about it. This is an aside. I love that line where 16-year-old Messi comes to practice, and this staff member who drove Messi to the game, he asked Ronaldinho, like, what do you think of this kid? Is he good enough? Can he play? And should he be like on the practice squad or something? And I was like, nah, he should be in the team. I love that Ronaldinho like took him under his wing. Like he gives Ronaldinho a lot of credit for. So that part is, so like this kind of like Kluivert lives in the city. He went back. Patrick Kluivert lives there. It's had like, not historically, but more recently, I remember it had like in the 50s, which is not in this book, but it had like a Filipino player who played for the team. But in the 90s, well, not 90s, under the Pep era, there were some black players, right? They were like Yaya Toure, Samuel Eto'o, etc. The interesting thing is like I may have not have seen this in the book because I know I didn't finish. I didn't finish near the end. I know you did. I don't think he talks about the Yaya Toure, what Yaya Toure thought of Pep, or what Samuel Eto'o thought of Pep. I mean, I don't think it invalidates again the thesis, maybe, because these black players like Abidal, I think, identified with the Catalan struggle. Like, I think he may have learned Catalan. Like a lot of these players, like identified with with the team and the politics of the
Cruyff
city.
Never did, by the way.
Province, huh?
Cruyff never learned Catalan.
Cruyff never learned Catalan, but I did think that was an interesting tension. Maybe that I was hoping he would. Given that we've read about all the stuff with Yaya Toure and Pep, and I mean, I think you know the Yaya Toure story better, but like the Samuel Eto'o is like, Samuel Eto'o said sort of something like, I like to play for him, but I didn't like him as a person.
Yeah, I think Yaya says something kind of similar. Well, Yaya is very blunt. Yaya accuses him of being a racist. He says like he doesn't like African players, and he says, he was very harsh with me. He would never have treated Iniesta in the same way. Now, if you think about what I didn't know, what Simon reveals about Iniesta's mental health struggles, and
that's in it. That's in it. That's in the book. That's in the book.
Yes, I mean, it's sort of, he's picking on an example. Yes, they were all going out of their way to actually be very gentle with Iniesta because they understood that he was at breaking point for years, and good for them, for a club taking on the mental health of a player. But you've had like two of the biggest black African stars at Barcelona suggesting that Pep doesn't have an easy relationship or has a problem with players from Africa. There's not a lot of players from Africa. I don't think there's any on Manchester City.
The interesting thing is like the coach that a lot of sort of I was going to say the left. I was just like woke that the left doesn't like Mourinho. He has a way better history with African players, and African players actually have publicly, I mean, in those very same quotes where Eto'o is very dismissive of Pep, he's quite laudatory, he's praising Mourinho. Like, I know Drogba, Pogba definitely not. But Drogba was always talking, how much he loved playing for Mourinho, like the religion. I know this. I've seen an article a while back about how sort of Mourinho have very conservative politics when it comes to like Portuguese. Like, I think his father-in-law fought in the colonial war in Angola. His own father, I think, made money of the dictatorship. He himself is in that sort of like the way that the Catholic Church,
man of the right, no question.
Yeah, the Catholic, he's very Catholic and whatever. But he's interestingly like, maybe we should unpack the post-colonial African at some point. But it's interesting, like the Africans seem to get along with.
But I think
with Pep,
and I think a better version as the contrast to me would be Jurgen Klopp, actually, because Pep is clearly very cold. His whole style is very cerebral, very much a cold thinker. He's not personal. You don't see Pep put his arm around the player ever. Klopp, on the other hand, is huggy. He's hugging everybody.
Well, let me get to Klopp for a minute, because I know we're Liverpool fans and people, Liverpool supporters. Of course, they're going to say nice things about Klopp. I read something about Klopp, which if I find that, I'll put it on the YouTube, where the YouTube video is, where somebody basically argued the way Klopp understands management is like somebody who works for like the Dutch East India Company, for like a multinational. So the old multinationals of the 17th century of like early capitalism, they didn't often care where they were a multinational company from Amsterdam, whatever, the Dutch East India Company, Verenigde Indies Campagna, and they treated the workers like, as long as you are loyal to the company. So Klopp, I'm trying to find this piece. I kind of like this Tony's frowning. I like this argument that the reason Klopp is successful is that he's just operating like a sort of an old merchant capital company in which because the Dutch East India Company, they're like Germans, French, English, whatever, where the colonies were, these people work for them. And so this argument is like, even if you want to give a spin on Klopp that is slightly critical of him, it's just that he's operating like somebody who's working for a multinational corporation. I think you may have seen it in one of those kind of management videos, a slightly critical take on Klopp. It's a wild argument. I know, but
no,
I
can just say, listen, Klopp. I mean, they both like treat the players like as human beings. They want to be their friend in a way that Pep never does. I just think Klopp's got much better politics than Mourinho.
No, I think Mourinho's like a dad. Mourinho's like a father. That's like.
But he's also probably got a colonial, as you said, like a colonial.
Yeah, there's a colonial thing to it. And then with that
you're
Italian
driving in the back of my truck, like.
Yeah, the famous one is, of course, KY mentions Balotelli and Mourinho gets along too. But the other one is that famous scene where what's the Materazzi, the infamous Materazzi from last week's episode when we mentioned Zidane. Where he's like saying goodbye to Mourinho after Inter beat Barcelona in that famous final. The one where that's one of my. I mean, of course, I also was a little soft spot for a little bit of Mourinho. I don't know why. I just like him as a coach. I like him as a coach. I don't like his politics. I like him as a coach.
Not where they sucked the life out of the game. That's how they won it. But anyway, let's not.
Anyway, I would recommend people watch the clip of Materazzi in the tunnel, like crying when Mourinho is. I want to before because I know we got. What are some of the other issues about this book that we also quickly wanted to talk about?
I mean, I'd highly recommend reading this book because it stimulates a lot of ideas and sort of thinking about where the modern game's at. And the one thing I'd say is like, what we really have to sort of think about is almost like you can write the epitaph of the great Barca team now. Like Barca is a very average European team.
It's done now, yeah. According to that book, it's going to take a while to build itself back. It's right.
If it ever does, it will be it's a generational project. But so
what's
interesting?
It's Man United, and then I apologize to myself.
But in some ways, like the legacy thing is quite interesting for me, and maybe in some ways, like Simon starts his book with Cruyff and Barcelona, and the introduction of like a certain much more what's the word, like sophisticated, intelligent, brain forward football that's doing things that are very much about a team and organizing the space and organizing the unit. Of course, like someone like Jonathan Wilson has written a lot of books on tactics, would be like, no, this starts with the Scottish coaches who go to Austria in the 1920s to share the passing game, and then you get the Wunder team, and you get the Wunder team laying the DNA for the magnificent Magyars who bamboozle England famously.
Jonathan Wilson book would give a lot more credit to Rinus. Probably Rinus Michaels.
No, absolutely. I mean, sadly, he's no E.P. Thompson when it comes to writing, whereas Simon actually writes really nice.
This is like a more enjoyable read. Football writing gods.
No, but I was going to say, that the story dates back long before Cruyff. Cruyff is inheriting a tradition, whether he knows it or not, and remaking it as his own, and as did Pep. And you can sort of see almost like in German football, like the German model of Klopp of gegenpressing is taking like a certain element of what had been the Cruyff philosophy of pressing and evolving it into something that's much more high tempo, much more frenzied, much more focused in the opposition's final third, where you're going to try and play, most of your game, versus the possession element. Like they're different. Like it's spun off into different hybrids. So there's like a hegemony of what Barcelona once represented that's like throughout the game now. So like a goalkeeper that basically can pass and can actually dribble even. There's a great moment, again, coming back to
just on this, the book does this argument, I think, sort of also like Barcelona invented a model, then would export it. Like after a while, Barcelona wasn't learning from anybody else. It was, I think he has a sort of line about they're giving workshops at conferences and people are asking them about Barcelona, but Barcelona is not asking, hey, Liverpool, what are you doing? Hey, whoever.
And also, like, if you think, I mean, I just want to just remember, like, one moment, like the most Cruyffian moment for me at Liverpool in the last however many seasons was that game at West Brom where we desperately need the win because we're going to not make the Champions League. And Alisson goes up for the corner. Now, that's always like the keeper goes up for the corner. Alisson jumps up, glances a perfect header into the bottom corner. That's a Cruyffian moment because all of your players are trained to play
interchangeable.
Football. Yeah. And so, like, those, as you say, and in some ways there's this is really stupid analogy, but you could say in the Cold War, like, you look at how China is supplanting the US as a major economy now versus during the Cold War, where getting China to adopt more and more, to integrate more and more into a capitalist world system was considered like a strategic objective. And it's like, yeah, be careful of what you wish for, because at the end, like, China sort of adopts that more and more of the model that positions it as the industrial capitalist heart of the global economy, and it starts to eclipse the US because capitalism is a global system.
Well, you could say when you said about the decline of Barcelona and the sort of, there's a point at which the oligarchs, again, be careful what you wish for. Like when football brings in the first, I think Barcelona took like ads from Qatar, maybe, like on the shirt. That was their first ad. And then you have like Atletico Madrid puts on the name of, I think it was Azerbaijan. It's like the beginning of that stuff. Then it comes like people start buying clubs, countries buy clubs. And now we're in a stage where Barcelona's model, which was a sort of a club that was, I don't know, wanting to be a country, to represent a country, but wasn't really a country. And now you got like the actual model of like countries buying clubs. And they are just like, Barcelona cannot win against them because football is now dominated by Man City, PSG, you know what I'm saying? And
football is not Newcastle, PSG. PSG has money to buy.
Dominated. I mean, like, they can buy the best players when they want to. They throw the market up,
Yeah, no, of course, and but you look at a club like Atletico Madrid, and it's like, oh, like they have they're giving Barca a run for its money. Like,
well, not so much anymore. I think that was just, they had a little golden period when the 2 times they went to the Champions League final. I think that little moment, I think it has again to do with a bunch of players from a certain generation, and there's only so much this coach can do. I'm not recommend. By the way, there's an Amazon series on him. Should we watch that and talk about that? It's a lot of episodes.
He comes from a more beastly era.
It looks really boring and kind of like it's a total ad for Simeone.
Yeah,
but it would be. I might watch it this week and I'll report back.
But I was just going to say, if we're wrapping up on Barca, that there's almost like the dialectics of this is that there's a moment of greatness and it is extraordinary and unparalleled, but nothing is forever. It's almost like
forever.
It creates its own nemesis. It really does, like, a lot of the ingredients that create that moment are also part of its downfall.
I have one last question. Should we mourn it? Should we mourn this whole thing, this thing that fell apart?
Yeah, I mean, there were things we'll miss.
Should we mourn a bourgeois? Did we mourn a bourgeois revolution? I'm just messing around now.
No, well, I mean, when we watched the Clásico, did we ever I would always be 100% Barcelona.
We would support Barcelona, yeah.
And for us, it was like, yeah, you can tell yourself, well, this was Franco's club, Real.
And we knew, and it's not that we were naive. We knew that it wasn't this like left-wing thing.
And bourgeois nationalism has a certain, historical function at certain points.
I think if I mourn something, I think it would be like, I loved how they played football.
Yeah, of course. I mean, they gave us moments of great pleasure.
Yeah, it felt beautiful. It was beautiful to watch. And I would say the last...
Particularly for short men.
Yeah, the last I would say that the games that I really like, apart from this game you're talking about, the one from 2011, is that one when they beat Arsenal in the final, Messi rising up for that header. I think Eto'o scores the other goal. And then I like the what I would think is the swan song of that whole thing, which is the end, the last Champions League one where they play Juventus, Paul Pogba's Juventus, and Neymar plays incredibly well. I think he scores like the last goal. I'm gonna have to go rewatch the highlights of that game. I think it was 20, maybe that's after they beat. Remember when they destroyed PSG and yeah. So then they go to the final and they beat Juventus. So this is at their best. They were beautiful to watch. I mean, I forget all the like politics of Messi's like asking his 555 million and all that. And he's some kind of, how do you say, like a puppet master of some sort. But on the field, it was not anti-football. It was beautiful to watch. It was incredible football, and it is sad to see them go. Like, to realize that like it's going to take them a while to rebuild, and given the structure of like club football at a global level, it's not going to be easy for them to come back.
And I think it might be a long time before we see a team that has as much of a positive influence on the way the game is played. Let's hope. Let's hope Klopp's Liverpool can be that. But
you had to make this one.
I have my doubts. Like,
I don't know. I think on that note, even Liverpool has to deal with this new reality about how football is organized, like oligarchs and states. I mean, it's remarkable that you have a league that in the 1980s, it was unusual to even have to have Arnold Muren or two Argentinians playing in it. And now it's like 11 players are on a field and there's like nobody who's from there. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just an incredible, and that
it was a fantastic match. I think it was an Arsenal Real Madrid match. Like, I don't know, it was in the 2008 or 2009, where there was only two English players on the field, but both were playing for Real Madrid.
Oh, was it Steve McManaman?
No, I think it was in the days when it was Beckham, and I think
Jonathan was the Beckham era. Was it Beckham and who?
Woodgate, I think, was.
Oh my God! Remember him from Leeds, right?
Yeah,
racist,
going out beating up like people.
But how did he get into Real Madrid? But this is the sort of thing that by the end Barcelona became like that. Did you see the one story about the guy who's on his way to is that in the book, about the kid who's like being told he should come and play for them? Oh yeah, that's in the book. This Cameroonian kid or something, and they tell him he's playing somewhere in China, I think, that he should come and play for Barcelona. And then at the last minute, they tell him no.
Yeah.
Abidal tells him, nah.
He gets on a plane and he flies.
Gets on a plane, yeah, and they tell him, no, we can. And then they buy Martin. They bring Martin Brathwaite, who failed in the UK,
No, absolutely.
And then I think there's another one where Messi says something like, why am I playing with these junior members or something? Put your best team on the field, and then they substitute somebody at halftime. No, some of it is
Albert to come back.
Yeah. Some of the Barcelona, the Barcelona by the end was a mess.
It's a mess.
Nobody is shocked by like what had happened to the club in the end, and kind of Messi now is sort of like,
we do need to wrap, but the one other interesting sort of aside that applies to all clubs in an interesting way is when he's talking about the impact of years of evolution of sports medicine, diet, players can play much, much longer. That like some of those, to have 35-year-olds in relatively attacking roles now.
That was something. Yeah. You got a good point.
Zlatan, never mind that Zlatan was not able to play at Barca, but
well, that's that story that clubs.
Like when he says that basically, he says an old head on legs that are still serviceable is an exceptional player. An old leg on old head on old legs is a problem. But you can just see players can play too much older, and it messes the whole system. Even that whole Messiah thing, like.
But then there's also like that had to do with, I think he has this one argument, like you have these players who are they in their prime, they're just making all this money. They crayfish smoking, Maradona's using whatever drugs, and then Ronaldo gets unhealthy. I think Ronaldinho, for example, can never like become serious. Like he tries to invite a journalist to come meet him in a nightclub so they can start writing his book. But the thing is, like the clubs I think he sort of makes a suggestion that the clubs decide at some point to kind of say to a player, we're going to give you so much money over such a long period if you stay healthy. And so there's a change also that happens in the best players start to think, okay, if I eat better, if I take care of myself, then I can be in this longer. I can play to 35, because before your best years ended at about 30, and now you could actually play into like 35, or in the case, as you said, of Zlatan, until you're 40. Zlatan, sadly, in the book, right, is the guy that Pep says to him. Well, Messi says to Pep, "Why do I need a guy? I don't need a guy. I run into the middle and then I have to pass him the ball. A big Swede. Move that guy out of the way, and then before you know it, Zlatan's on the bench, and then before you know it, Zlatan is out of the club."
Yeah.
But it's a good book. It's a great book. I would recommend it.
I recommend it. You don't have to agree with all of it, but it'll definitely start you thinking.
It's a great story. It's a great story. So with that, I think we did go over the time, Tony. That's episode 2 wrapped.
It's Fergie time. We had 12 minutes of Fergie time.
Are we going to talk about Man United next week? I don't know. Maybe we should get some United stuff.
We're just trying to antagonize them. Yeah. Okay. All right, man.
Anyway, excellent. More than a club. That was
more than a podcast. More than a podcast.
More than a podcast. Good night. Thanks, Tony. Take it easy, bro.
Bye.
Okay, cool. You can stay here when I end the broadcast. Hold on. You don't have to leave.